The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Jesus said, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand, and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, 'Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those at his left hand, 'You that are accursed, depart from me from the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not give me clothing. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they also will answer, 'Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and did not take care of you?' Then he will answer them, 'Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to the one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Back several weeks ago on All Saints Sunday, we circled back to the beginning of Jesus' public ministry at the Sermon on the Mount, and we saw where he has been heading all along in his teaching. When we returned to the Sermon on the Mount, back to the beginning of the words, to revisit the Beatitudes, it also was giving us a glimpse of God's connection to us and our connection to God. Jesus saying from the beginning that the kingdom of heaven is found in blessing people, especially people who never seem to receive the world's blessings otherwise. That blessing doesn't come from our excess or even our abundance, but blessing comes as the way of life that we demonstrate in every circumstance that we find ourselves in. In today's gospel, Matthew says, "I'm going to give you a glimpse of the future now, so that you'll be able to make some adjustments in your priorities and prepare for what will come." So Jesus says, share your food, drink, a warm welcome, some clothes, a hospital visit, and a prison visit. But as often happens when we try to make law out of the gospel, we begin by making this the list, checking to make sure that we've completed enough of those tasks to be identified in the sheep category and not be seen as a goat. That list then informs us how we measure up, literally justifying the group that we belong in. Here's an interesting insight into the teachings of Jesus. Jesus is never upset at sinners. Jesus is never upset at sinners. He's only upset with people who do not think that they are sinners. And if you go back and reread this gospel story carefully today, you're going to notice that both groups are totally baffled by the verdicts that they received. Both groups ask, when was it? It's a surprise to them. For one group, they have their paradigm stabilizers on. They never saw the need. And for others, they respond to the need, part of their fabric of who they are. To bless others, not as checking off a list, but as a way of life every day, in every encounter and intersection. I've used this picture of this fabric art, and I love this picture because it has so many different kinds of textures and different kinds of thread that is a part of this piece of fabric. And I think that really is a good representation of us as human beings, that we all begin with a basic nature of who we are. And over time and over our lives, we weave other parts into our lives that become very much part of us. You know, every once in a while, someone will say to me, "Do you remember when you said this?" Or, "I watched you when you were doing something, and I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but now I totally get what you were saying." And they name that particular action or that particular phrase. I have no recollection of it. It wasn't something that I had tagged as important, but someone else did. That's what Jesus is getting at in this gospel today, that a life expressed in blessing others is never something that you can kind of measure as something that you intentionally did. That it's part of your life expression at all levels. It's not acted out so that others will notice it. And of course, the other end of that continuum is also true in my life. So I've had those times that I've said something that I had no idea or recollection that I'd said it, and it meant something so powerful to someone else. And then there's been those other times that I've calculated the good. Over the years, I have finished my sermon on Saturday night, and I've looked at that sermon and I go, boy, this is really going to work tomorrow. This is going to be awesome tomorrow. And invariably, those are the sermons that fall the flattest on their face. They always do. And then there are those Saturdays that I go to bed, and I go to bed late on Saturday, and I'm still wrestling with the sermon. I have put in the time, I put in the effort, I put in the prayer, and it just doesn't seem like it's hanging together at all. And I go, Lord, it's not because I was lazy this week, but I just don't know if I've got a handle on it for tomorrow. Those are inevitably the sermons that someone will come to me and say, Ron, that just, hit me right where I'm living. It was really important for me to hear that today. I've learned to not calculate whether the sermon's any good or not. But we do that in life, don't we? We calculate the goodness that we're going to do and the good things that we're going to offer, and then we wonder why it isn't as powerful as we thought it was. But then those things that we just are as a part of our very natures of who we are can have the most power and effective influence on people. Jesus is talking about that when he tells us this parable today. If we've learned anything this year, this change in our basic fabric of who we are to become as a fully integrated believer of the Jesus way, these spirit-shaping priorities that we infuse into our lives are intentional. We have to do this work. We have to discipline ourselves in prayer and in study. We have to discipline ourselves to say yes to one thing and no to other things. We have to set our priorities with Jesus as the goal. And we know that those things just don't happen by osmosis. If ever the word counterculture was honest and true for us today in our world that has set God off to the sideline, or relegated God to substitute status, or added God only into the add-ons or the extracurricular activities of a person's life, we are truly counter to that culture. Because I'm asking you to live as a believer of Jesus every day, all the time, in everything you do. But that does require that you put in the intentional effort of putting those aspects of your life that are holy and godly into your life, so that over time, the fabric of who you are as a basic, integrated human being does change. In these words of Jesus, I'm convinced that Jesus wants us to reach down to a deeper place in our beings, to confront our motivations, to confront our self-protection and our self-projections, and to determine that, well, you've heard it before, you probably have this voice in your head, well, that's just how I've always been. Take it or leave it, that's just how I've always been. You know, that's reached the statute of limitations for all of you. You've reached the end of that. It's time for the new you. It's time for the God-infused you. It's in time for the Spirit-shaped you to begin to take shape and form. This is Bobby Duncan's General Store. It's just south of Pine Knot, Kentucky. It's real close to Winfield, Tennessee. Chances are no one here today knows where that's at except me and Charlotte, because that's where Charlotte grew up, and most of her family still lives right there. Duncan's General Store is one of the last true general stores in this part of the country. It's not one of those touristy kind of trinket stores. This one-room building has a little bit of everything, from clothing to copper plumbing, from homemade plum pies to toilet bowl cleaner. Bobby Duncan's grandfather ran the general store, his father ran the general store, and now Bobby runs the general store. You see stuff on every rafter, in every aisle, that you'll never see anywhere else. Real washboards for sale. All sorts of galvanized farm equipment. There are pieces of cast iron in the floors just waiting to stub your toe when you try to make your way through the aisles. The last time I was there, it was difficult to walk down the aisles for all the mercantiles stacked in every direction. Many items are so old, the containers and the paper that they're packaged in is faded and worn. For decades, many items have just resided at Duncan's General Store, and their time for usefulness has long since faded. You know, I don't know if Mr. Duncan has ever done an itemized inventory, made a list of everything that he has at the store, from groceries to wrapping paper and string, or if he's had too much of one thing and not enough of another thing. I don't think he's ever determined if some things have outlived their usefulness. But perhaps he holds on to them because they represent a past that he likes better than the present. Perhaps he thinks there might be a use for them someday. But as sure as I say that, I'd bet that he could locate everything in his general store. See, our scriptures today are encouraging us to take a complete inventory of our lives, of all we have collected over time, our values, the emphasis that we make in life, our personalities, and determine where our priorities are at the most fundamental of levels. What is it that you think about all the time? We're in the shower, and that thought comes back. You're eating breakfast, that thought comes back. You're driving to work, that thought comes back. What is it that is filling your life? What is it that you're looking for to see down the road? What are you looking for out of life? We need to pause long enough in the midst of all the hurry to get wherever we think we're going, to take a personal inventory of our lives. Remember that the goats in the parable weren't condemned for doing bad things. They were pointed out for doing nothing. They demonstrated no ill will toward the hungry or the thirsty or the stranger. They just simply saw no relationship or need whatsoever between the lives of those people and their own. So Jesus is able to point this out in this simple way, telling us we can't know our brothers and our sisters if we won't look at them, if we don't see them. Even if we see them as projects or programs, we aren't really seeing them as people necessarily. This week is Thanksgiving, as all of you know, and today is our stewardship ingathering, which got me to thinking that some of the most intense moments of thankfulness are usually not found in the times of plenty. In that mythological future American nirvana, when everything slows down and evens out and becomes peaceful and bliss for us. The most intense moments of thankfulness, it seems to me, is when life has been difficult, when life has been messy, when it all seems around us demands a great effort from us, when life's difficulties seem sometimes to just be overwhelming. That's when, if we can pause, we seem to be the most grateful. See, that, my friends, is when the pricelessness of gratefulness is really evident for us. You see, thankfulness always encourages gratitude. Gratitude always encourages generosity. Generosity always encourages love. Love always encourages action. And action encourages Spirit-shaped transformation.